My wife texted going on a trip with my ex. Don't be jealous, I replied. Don't worry, I won't be here when you get back. My name is Marcus Hale, and at 38 years old, I thought I'd seen enough bullshit to last me a lifetime. Boy, was I wrong. Life has this twisted sense of humor where just when you think you've got things figured out, it sucker punches you right in the gut with a text message that makes you question everything you thought you knew about the person sleeping next to you every night. It was a Thursday evening. Nothing special, just another mind-numbing day at the office where I pushed papers around and pretended to care about quarterly reports. I dragged myself home to our cramped two-bedroom apartment, the one Clara always complained wasn't stylish enough for her Instagram photos. You know the type. Exposed brick walls and Edison bulbs weren't cutting it for her aesthetic anymore. I was sprawled on our beat-up couch, the same one she'd been nagging me to replace for 2 years, when my phone buzzed with that familiar ping that usually meant she was asking me to pick up groceries or reminding me about some friend's birthday party I'd rather skip. Instead, what I saw made my blood turn to ice water in my veins. Going on a trip with my ex, don't be jealous. 6 words. 6 fucking words that managed to demolish 4 years of what I'd stupidly believed was a solid relationship. Not even a phone call, not even the decency of a face-to-face conversation. Just a casual text, like she was telling me she'd grabbed milk from the store. The sheer audacity of it hit me harder than the betrayal itself. Don't be jealous? Don't be jealous? Lady, you just announced you're gallivanting off with the same douchebag who cheated on you 3 times before we got together, and you're telling me not to be jealous like I'm some insecure teenager throwing a tantrum. I stared at that message for what felt like hours, but was probably only 30 seconds. My thumb hovered over the keyboard, and for a hot minute, I considered doing what the old Marcus would have done, typing out some pathetic plea, asking her to reconsider, maybe even offering to take time off work so we could go somewhere together instead. The Marcus who'd spent 4 years bending over backwards, working double shifts to cover her half of the rent when her freelance graphic design career wasn't paying the bills. The Marcus who'd pretended not to notice when she'd come home at 2 a.m. claiming she'd been networking at some artsy event downtown. But something inside me snapped. Maybe it was the casual cruelty of her message, or maybe it was the sudden clarity that hit me like a freight train. I'd been playing the fool for way too long. All those late nights when she'd flip her phone face down the second I walked into the room. All those mysterious girls' nights that somehow never included any of the girls I actually knew. All those times she'd pick fights with me right before going out, like she needed to justify something to herself. Clara had always been what my buddy Leo called a chaos junkie, someone who thrived on drama, who needed the emotional roller coaster to feel alive. She'd start arguments just to make up passionately later, create problems just so she could be the one to solve them, and apparently, now she was creating the ultimate chaos by running off with her ex just to see if I'd come crawling after her. Well, surprise, surprise, princess. This time, Daddy wasn't going to chase. My fingers moved across the screen with a steadiness that surprised even me. Don't worry. I won't be here when you get back. Send. The satisfaction that washed over me was immediate and intoxicating. For 4 years, I'd been the stable one, the responsible one, the guy who paid the bills while she found herself. I'd been her safety net, her backup plan, her reliable Marcus who would always be there no matter how badly she treated me. But you know what? Even the most patient man has his breaking point, and mine had just been obliterated by a text message that read like it was written by a sociopath. I could practically picture her face when she read my response. She'd probably expected me to blow up her phone with desperate calls, maybe even show up at wherever she was staying to beg her not to go. That's what had happened the last time she'd pulled this shit. 2 years ago when she'd reconnected with an old college friend who turned out to be another ex. I'd played right into her hands then, pleading with her to stay, promising to be better, to pay more attention, to be more spontaneous. What a fucking joke that had been. This time was different. This time, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Freedom. Pure, unadulterated freedom from her emotional manipulation, her constant need for validation, her exhausting drama. It was like someone had lifted a weight off my chest that I didn't even realize I'd been carrying. I looked around our apartment, our so-called love nest, and for the first time, I saw it clearly. The place looked like a shrine to her narcissism, her yoga mats taking up half the living room, Her organic skincare products covering every surface in the bathroom. Her collection of self-help books about living your best life, stacked everywhere except actually being read. The few things that were mine had been relegated to corners, like I was a guest in my own home. The irony wasn't lost on me. She thought she was punishing me by running off with her ex, but all she'd really done was hand me the keys to my own prison cell. For 4 years, I'd been living my life on her terms, walking on eggshells, trying to be the perfect boyfriend to a woman who saw me as nothing more than a comfortable backup plan. Well, congratulations, Clara. You just freed me from the worst relationship decision I'd ever made. My phone sat silent on the coffee table, and I knew it wouldn't stay that way for long. Soon enough, she'd realized that her little power play had backfired spectacularly. She'd probably start with confused texts, then move on to angry ones, and finally resort to the tears and apologies that had worked so well in the past. But this time, I had something I'd never had before, the absolute certainty that I was done being her emotional punching bag. The evening stretched ahead of me, quiet and full of possibilities I hadn't dared to imagine in years. That night, I began to pack, and let me tell you, there's something almost therapeutic about dismantling a life that was never really yours to begin with. I didn't storm around the apartment throwing shit into boxes like some unhinged ex-boyfriend in a rom-com. Nope. This was methodical, surgical even. Every shirt folded with military precision, every drawer emptied with the kind of calm that would have scared the hell out of Clara if she'd been there to witness it. The silence in our apartment was deafening, but not in a lonely way. More like the quiet you get right before a massive thunderstorm breaks. You know that moment when the air gets thick and everything goes still, and you can practically taste the electricity? That's exactly what this felt like, except instead of waiting for lightning, I was creating my own damn storm by packing up 4 years of what I'd foolishly called love. I started with my clothes, because let's face it, that was the easy stuff. T-shirts, jeans, the handful of button-downs I wore to work. Everything Clara had always complained made me look too corporate or not artistic enough. Well, guess what, sweetheart? I wasn't trying to be artistic. I was trying to be a functioning adult who paid bills and showed up to work on time. Concepts that seemed to elude her completely. As I folded each piece of clothing, I couldn't help but notice how little space my stuff actually took up. 4 years of living together, and my entire wardrobe fit into 2 medium-sized boxes. Meanwhile, Clara's clothes had somehow metastasized throughout the entire apartment like some kind of fashionable cancer. Her vintage band t-shirts, from bands she'd never actually listened to, hanging in the closet, her collection of statement jackets draped over every chair, her army of barely worn shoes lined up like soldiers ready for battle they'd never see. Moving on to my books was where things got interesting. I'd always been a reader, science fiction mostly, some history, a few biographies of people who'd actually accomplished something with their lives. Clara used to mock my boring reading choices while her own bookshelf was packed with self-help garbage with titles like Unleash Your Inner Goddess and The Art of Not Giving AF***CK. The irony of that last one wasn't lost on me, considering she gave way too many F***CKs about everything except our relationship. Each book I packed felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. These were conversations we'd had, worlds I'd escaped to when her drama became too much to handle. She'd always interrupted me when I was reading, claiming I was ignoring her or being antisocial. Looking back, I realized those interruptions weren't about wanting my attention. They were about controlling it. God forbid I have 5 minutes of peace without her being the center of my universe. Then came the real gut punch, our framed photos, or as I now like to think of them, evidence of a 4-year delusion. There was our trip to Portland last spring, where she'd spent the entire weekend complaining about the rain and posting filtered selfies to make it look like she was having the time of her life. There was Christmas at my parents' house, where she'd charmed everyone with her free spirit, while I cringed internally, knowing she'd spend the drive home picking apart everything my family had said or done. But the photo that really got to me was the one from our second anniversary dinner. I remembered that night so clearly. I'd saved up for weeks to take her to this fancy restaurant downtown, the kind of place where they don't list prices on the menu because if you have to ask, you can't afford it. She'd worn this red dress that made her look absolutely stunning, and for a few hours, I'd actually believed we were happy. In the photo, We're both smiling, my arm around her waist, looking like the perfect couple. What the camera didn't capture was what happened 20 minutes after that photo was taken. She'd spent the entire dinner on her phone, texting someone she claimed was just a friend from work. When I gently asked if she could put it away for our anniversary dinner, she'd exploded, accusing me of being controlling and insecure. We'd left early, spent the drive home in stone-cold silence, and I'd ended up sleeping on the couch that night because she was too upset to have me in the bedroom. Looking at that photo now, I could see what I'd been too blind to notice then. Her smile never reached her eyes. She was already checked out, already looking for the exit, already planning her next move. I'd been so desperate to make us work that I'd convinced myself those moments of happiness were real instead of just breaks between the chaos. I packed the photos face down, not because I was angry, but because I finally understood they were fiction. We'd never been the couple in those pictures. I'd been the guy desperately trying to hold on to something that was never really there, and she'd been the actress playing the role of devoted girlfriend while auditioning for her next part. The kitchen was next, and holy shit, did that tell a story. My coffee maker, the one appliance I'd insisted on when we moved in together, sat there like a loyal friend. Clara had always mocked my obsession with good coffee, preferring her sugary Starbucks concoctions that cost more than most people's lunch. But every morning for 4 years, I'd made coffee strong enough to fuel a small city, because that's what kept me functional enough to deal with her constant emotional tornado. My books, my coffee maker, my clothes. It was pathetic how little I'd actually contributed to this space. Everything else screamed Clara. Her decorative candles that she never lit, her collection of succulents that I'd kept alive because she always forgot to water them, her vision board on the refrigerator covered with pictures of places she wanted to travel and things she wanted to do, none of which included me. By midnight, my entire life fit into the back of my Honda Accord. For years of what I'd thought was building a future together, and I could pack it all up in a few hours. That should have been depressing, but instead, it felt liberating as hell. I wasn't leaving behind a home. I was escaping a beautifully decorated prison cell. As I loaded the last box into my car, I took one final look at our apartment. The place looked exactly the same, just with a few empty spaces where my stuff used to be. It was like I'd never really lived there at all, like I'd been a ghost haunting someone else's life for 4 years. I didn't slam the door behind me. I didn't even look back. I just locked it, slipped the key under the mat, and walked away from the biggest mistake of my adult life with the kind of quiet dignity that would have pissed Clara off more than any screaming match ever could. The next morning, my phone exploded like a goddamn fireworks show on the 4th of July, except instead of celebrating freedom, Clara was having a full-blown meltdown in my text messages. I'm talking rapid-fire notifications that would have made a machine gun jealous. My phone was buzzing so aggressively, I thought it might vibrate itself right off the nightstand of my crappy motel room. Yeah, that's right. I'd spent my first night of freedom in a Motel 6 that smelled like disinfectant and broken dreams. The kind of place where the ice machine sounds like it's having an existential crisis, and the wallpaper pattern looks like it was designed by someone having a bad acid trip in 1987. But you know what? It was mine. No Clara, no drama, no walking on eggshells. Just me, a lumpy mattress, and the sweet sound of absolutely nobody else's bullshit. Clara's text marathon started around 7 a.m., which was rich considering she'd never been awake before noon unless there was some kind of emergency or a sample sale at her favorite boutique. Her first message was almost cute in its confusion. Wait, what do you mean you won't be here? Like she genuinely couldn't comprehend that actions might have consequences. It was followed immediately by where did you go? And then, Marcus, this isn't funny. Isn't funny? Lady, I wasn't trying to be a comedian. I was trying to be a man with an ounce of self-respect, something I'd apparently misplaced somewhere around year 2 of our relationship. But here's the thing that would have blown her manipulative little mind. I didn't respond. Not to the first text, not to the 20th, not to any of them. I just sat there in that shitty motel room, drinking coffee that tasted like it had been filtered through old gym socks, watching her panic unfold in real time through my phone screen like the world's most satisfying soap opera. The evolution of her messages was pure psychological gold. Stage 1 was confusion mixed with that entitled attitude she'd perfected over the years. Are you seriously upset about this? It's just a trip. Just a trip. Right. Because taking off with your ex-boyfriend who you'd spent 3 years telling me was a toxic asshole was totally just a casual vacation. No big deal. Nothing to see here, folks. Stage 2 was where things got interesting. The messages started coming faster, with more typos, which meant she was either drunk or genuinely panicked. Probably both, knowing Clara. This is ridiculous, followed by you're being childish, followed by my personal favorite. I can't believe you're throwing a tantrum over this. A tantrum. Because apparently, having enough self-respect to walk away from someone who treats you like garbage is the emotional equivalent of a toddler losing their shit in the cereal aisle. By noon, she'd moved into stage 3, bargaining. Look, if you're really this upset, I won't go. Too little, too late, sweetheart. The damage was done the second she thought it was okay to announce her little adventure via text message, like she was updating her Instagram story. We can talk about this like adults, she wrote, which was hilarious coming from someone who'd never had an adult conversation about anything more serious than what to order for dinner. But the real entertainment started around 2 p.m. when she shifted into stage 4, full-blown desperation with a side of manipulation. Where are you? Please answer me. I'm worried about you. This isn't like you. And there it was, the classic Clara move of making herself the victim in a situation she'd created. She wasn't worried about me. She was worried about losing control of the narrative. The messages kept coming like a digital avalanche. She tried guilt. For years, Marcus. You're going to throw away for years over this. She tried logic. We can work through this if you just talk to me. She even tried reverse psychology. Fine. If you want to be immature about this, that's your choice. Each message was a window into her psychological playbook, and I was finally seeing the game she'd been playing all along. Meanwhile, I was doing something I hadn't done in years, exactly what I wanted to do. I drove around town with no destination in mind, windows down, music loud enough to drown out the sound of my phone buzzing. I stopped at a diner I'd been wanting to try for months, but never could because Clara thought diners were beneath her sophisticated palate. I ordered a burger and fries and ate every greasy, delicious bite without someone across from me complaining about processed food and empty calories. The freedom was intoxicating. No schedule to keep except my own. No mood to manage except mine. No drama to navigate. No eggshells to tiptoe around. No emotional landmines to carefully sidestep. For the first time in 4 years, I could just exist without having to justify my existence to someone else. By evening, I'd found a modest rental across town. Nothing fancy, just a one-bedroom apartment with hardwood floors that creaked when you walked and a balcony that overlooked a quiet street lined with oak trees. The landlord was this old guy named Frank who didn't give a shit about my relationship drama, just wanted first month's rent and a security deposit. Cash transaction, keys in hand, done deal. As I stood on that creaky balcony, watching the sun set over a neighborhood I'd never lived in before, my phone buzzed one more time. Clara's final message of the day. I don't understand what I did wrong. And that right there. That complete lack of self-awareness, that inability to see how announcing a romantic getaway with an ex via text message might be hurtful. That was everything I needed to know about why this relationship had been doomed from the start. I could have explained it to her. I could have written a novel-length response breaking down exactly what she'd done wrong, how she'd treated me, why I was done. But you know what's more powerful than words? Silence. Complete, absolute, deafening silence. She'd spent 4 years talking at me, talking over me, talking around me, but never really talking to me. Now it was my turn to communicate, and I was saying everything I needed to say by saying absolutely nothing at all. The silence was my response, my statement, my final answer. And in a world where Clara had always been the loudest voice in the room, my silence was the most powerful thing I'd ever said. 2 days later, my phone rang, and for a split second, I thought it might be Clara trying a different approach to break through my wall of silence. But no, the caller ID showed Leo Carter, and suddenly I realized I was actually excited to talk to another human being. Funny how you don't realize you've been living in isolation until someone throws you a lifeline you actually want to grab. Leo and I had been buddies since college, back when we were both young and stupid enough to think we knew everything about life. He'd watched my entire relationship with Clara unfold like a slow-motion car crash, and to his credit, he'd tried to warn me more than once. But you know how it is when you're neck deep in someone else's crazy. You can't see the forest for the trees, and you definitely can't see the red flags for the rose-colored glasses. Marcus, dude. Leo's voice came through the phone with that particular mix of disbelief and sympathy that told me he'd already heard Clara's version of events. What the hell is going on? Clara's been blowing up everyone's phones telling them you left her over some harmless trip she wanted to take. I had to laugh at that. Harmless trip. Right. Like taking a romantic getaway with your ex-boyfriend is the equivalent of going to visit your grandmother in Florida. The audacity of this woman never ceased to amaze me, even when I thought I'd reached my limit for being amazed by her bullshit. Let me guess, I said, settling into the creaky chair in my new apartment. She's painting herself as the victim in this whole situation, right? Poor little Clara, abandoned by her heartless boyfriend who couldn't handle her free spirit. Pretty much, yeah, Leo confirmed, and I could hear him trying not to laugh. But here's the thing, man, nobody's buying it. I mean, some people are being polite about it, but anyone who's spent more than 5 minutes around you two knows what's really going on here. That hit me harder than I expected it to. For 4 years, I'd been so worried about what people thought of our relationship, so concerned with maintaining the facade that everything was perfect, that I'd never stopped to consider that maybe our friends weren't as blind as I'd been. Maybe they'd been watching me slowly disappear into Clara's drama and wondering when I'd finally wake up. She's telling people you threw a tantrum over her going on vacation, Leo continued, and I could practically hear him making air quotes through the phone. But dude, everyone knows about her ex. Everyone knows what kind of vacation this really is. The fact that you didn't fight, didn't beg, didn't make a scene, that's what's eating her alive. And there it was. The truth I'd been too close to see clearly. Clara had always thrived on chaos, on drama, on the emotional roller coaster of fighting and making up. She needed the intensity, the tears, the passionate reconciliations that made her feel like she was living in some kind of romantic movie where she was the star and I was the supporting character whose only job was to chase her around and beg for her attention. You know what the crazy part is? Leo went on, and I could tell he was just getting warmed up. She actually seems confused about why you left. Like, genuinely confused. She's telling everyone she doesn't understand what she did wrong, and that you're being unreasonable. It's like she lives in a completely different reality than the rest of us. That tracked. Clara had always had this amazing ability to rewrite history in real time, to take situations where she was clearly in the wrong and somehow twist them around until she was the injured party. It was like watching a master magician at work, except instead of pulling rabbits out of hats, she was pulling victimhood out of situations where she was the one holding the knife. The thing is, Leo said, and his voice got more serious, everyone's been waiting for this moment for years. We've all watched her treat you like shit, watched you bend over backwards trying to make her happy, watched you lose yourself in her crazy. When someone texted me that you'd finally walked away, my first thought wasn't, oh no, poor Clara. It was, thank God, he finally grew a spine. Ouch. But also, yeah, fair point. I had been spineless for way too long, hadn't I? I'd been so afraid of being alone, so terrified of admitting that I'd wasted 4 years of my life on someone who saw me as nothing more than a convenient safety net, that I'd let her walk all over me until I'd forgotten what it felt like to stand up straight. She's also been trying to get people to call you, Leo added with a chuckle, asking mutual friends to talk sense into you and convince you to stop being stubborn. But here's the beautiful part. Nobody wants to do it. Like, nobody. Even the people who like Clara are basically telling her she made her bed and now she gets to lie in it. The satisfaction that washed over me was immediate and warm. For years, I'd felt like I was the crazy one, like I was the problem in our relationship. Clara had this way of making me feel like every issue between us was somehow my fault. I wasn't attentive enough. I wasn't spontaneous enough. I wasn't understanding enough of her complex emotional needs. But hearing that our friends had been watching the same shit show I'd been living and coming to the same conclusions I was finally reaching, that was validating in a way I hadn't expected. You want to know the best part? Leo asked, and I could tell he was grinning. Jake ran into her at that coffee shop downtown yesterday. You know, the pretentious one she always drags people to because they have oat milk or whatever. He said she looked like hell. Dark circles under her eyes. Hair a mess. The whole 9 yards. And when he asked how she was doing, she just started crying right there in line. I should have felt bad about that. The old Marcus would have felt guilty, would have started second-guessing himself, would have wondered if maybe he was being too harsh. But the new Marcus? The one who'd finally remembered what self-respect felt like? I felt nothing but cold satisfaction. She'd made her choice when she sent that text. She'd rolled the dice and lost, and now she was learning what it felt like to face consequences for once in her privileged little life. The truth is, man, Leo said, his voice getting serious again, you did the only thing you could do. You didn't fight, you didn't beg, you didn't give her the drama she was looking for. You just walked away with your dignity intact. And that's what's driving her absolutely insane. Dignity. Yeah, I like the sound of that. For the first time in years, I had my dignity back, and it felt better than any relationship ever had. A week later, I was just settling into the rhythm of my new life when Clara showed up at my door like a bad penny that keeps turning up when you least want to see it. I'd been enjoying a quiet Saturday morning in my creaky little apartment, drinking coffee that actually tasted good and reading a book without someone interrupting me every 5 minutes to complain about literally everything under the sun. Then came the knock. Not just any knock, mind you. This was the Clara special, urgent, demanding, with that particular rhythm that said, I'm important and you need to drop everything right now to deal with my feelings. 3 sharp raps, pause, 3 more raps, like she was some kind of emotional Morse code operator sending out distress signals. I knew it was her before I even looked through the peephole, but I looked anyway, because sometimes you need visual confirmation of the train wreck that's about to hit your peaceful morning. And there she was, looking like she'd been through a blender set on emotional breakdown. Her usually perfect hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, no makeup, wearing those ratty yoga pants. She only broke out when she was having what she liked to call a moment of authentic vulnerability. Marcus, I know you're in there, she called through the door, her voice doing that trembling thing that used to make me cave instantly. We need to talk. You can't just throw everything away like this. Oh, but I could. And I was. Standing there on the other side of that door, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years, complete control over my own life. She could knock until her knuckles bled. She could cry until she dehydrated herself. She could camp out on my doorstep like some kind of romantic movie stalker. None of it was going to make me open that door. I don't understand what happened, she continued, and I could hear her leaning against the door now. 1 minute everything was fine, and the next minute you're gone. It was just a trip, Marcus. I needed space to figure things out. Space. That magic word again. The only time Clara ever needed space was when it involved another man, usually an ex-boyfriend who'd suddenly reappeared in her life like a recurring infection. She never needed space when I was paying her half of the rent because her freelance career wasn't covering her expensive taste in organic everything. She never needed space when she wanted me to drive her to the airport at 5 a.m. because Uber was too expensive. She never needed space when she needed someone to listen to her complain about her friends, her family, her job, or whatever other crisis was currently consuming her self-absorbed little world. I know I should have talked to you about it first, she said, and I had to give her credit. She was hitting all the right notes in her apology symphony. But I didn't think you'd react like this. I thought you trusted me. Trust her? I trusted her right up until the moment she announced via text message that she was running off with her ex-boyfriend like it was the most natural thing in the world. I trusted her through all those late nights when she came home smelling like someone else's cologne. I trusted her through all those mysterious phone calls she had to take in the other room. I trusted her right up until my trust finally died of exhaustion from being constantly abused. The knocking started up again, more urgent now, with that edge of panic that meant she was finally starting to understand that her usual manipulation tactics weren't working. You can't just disappear like this. It's been a week, Marcus. A week. I've been worried sick about you. Worried sick. Right. She'd been worried sick about losing her safety net, her backup plan, her reliable Marcus who would always be there to clean up her messes and pay for her mistakes. But worried about me as a person? About my feelings, my well-being, my happiness? That was rich coming from someone who'd spent 4 years treating me like an emotional support human whose only job was to make her feel better about herself. I called your work, she said, and I could hear the desperation creeping into her voice now. They said you took some personal time. Where are you staying? Are you okay? Please just talk to me. Personal time. Yeah, I'd burned through some of my accumulated vacation days to give myself space to breathe, to think, to remember what it felt like to be a human being instead of an extension of Clara's ego. My boss had been surprisingly understanding when I'd explained that I was going through a life transition. He'd even made a joke about midlife crises, which would have been funnier if I hadn't been dead serious about needing to rebuild my entire existence from scratch. I know I made a mistake, Clara continued. And here we were getting to the heart of her manipulation playbook. The admission of fault, delivered with just the right amount of vulnerability to make me feel like a monster for not instantly forgiving her. I should have talked to you first. I should have been more considerate of your feelings. But Marcus, you're the love of my life. You're my person. I can't lose you over this. Love of her life. Her person. The same person she'd casually informed via text that she was taking a romantic getaway with her ex-boyfriend. The same person whose feelings she'd never once considered before making any major decision in 4 years of what I'd foolishly thought was a partnership. If I was the love of her life, then I felt genuinely sorry for any other poor bastard who might come after me. The crying started then. Real tears, not the crocodile variety she usually deployed when she wanted something. I could hear her sliding down the door, probably sitting on my doorstep now like some kind of abandoned puppy. And you know what? Part of me wanted to open that door. Part of me wanted to comfort her, to tell her everything would be okay, to fall back into the familiar pattern of being her emotional caretaker. But a bigger part of me, the part that had finally remembered what self-respect felt like, stayed right where I was. Because this wasn't about love anymore. Hell, maybe it had never been about love. This was about respect, about basic human decency, about treating your partner like an actual partner instead of a convenient accessory to your life. She'd had 4 years to figure out how to respect me, and she'd failed spectacularly. Now she could figure out how to live without me. Days bled into weeks, and Clara's approach to winning me back evolved like some kind of twisted psychological experiment. What started as desperate pleas and crocodile tears slowly morphed into something uglier. Something that showed me exactly who she really was underneath all that fake vulnerability. And honestly, it was the best thing that could have happened, because it made walking away feel less like abandoning someone I loved and more like escaping a psychological prison I'd been too blind to recognize. The text messages came in waves, each one more revealing than the last. At first, she tried the pity party approach. I can't eat. I can't sleep. I'm falling apart without you. Classic Clara, making everything about her suffering while completely ignoring the fact that she'd caused this whole mess in the first place. It was like watching someone complain about getting wet after deliberately jumping in a swimming pool. When the pity party didn't work, she switched to bargaining mode. I'll cancel the trip. I'll never talk to him again. I'll do whatever you want if you just come home. Too little, too late, sweetheart. The damage wasn't just in the trip itself. It was in the casual way she'd announced it. The complete disregard for my feelings, the assumption that I'd just roll over and take whatever she dished out, because that's what I'd been doing for 4 years. But it was when the bargaining phase failed that things got really interesting. That's when Clara's mask finally slipped, and I got to see the real person I'd been sharing a bed with all this time. The shift was so dramatic, it was almost impressive. Like watching Jekyll transform into Hyde, except Hyde had better hair and a victim complex the size of Texas. You never loved me, came the first venomous text, arriving at 2 a.m. on a Tuesday like some kind of midnight revelation. If you really loved me, you wouldn't abandon me like this. The irony was so thick you could cut it with a knife. She was accusing me of not loving her because I refused to stick around and be treated like garbage. In Clara's twisted logic, love meant accepting whatever scraps of affection she felt like throwing my way while she gallivanted around with other men. The next message was even better. You're heartless. You're cold. You were just waiting for an excuse to leave me. Waiting for an excuse? Lady, I'd had excuses coming out of my ears for 4 years. I could have left when she spent our vacation fund on a shopping spree without telling me. I could have left when she forgot to invite me to her company Christmas party because her ex was going to be there. I could have left when she started picking fights with me every time she wanted to go out without me. But I hadn't left. I'd stayed. Like an idiot, thinking that love meant enduring endless bullshit in silence. You were looking for any reason to run away because you're scared of real intimacy. she texted the next day, and I had to laugh at that one. Scared of real intimacy? I'd spent 4 years trying to get intimate with someone who kept me at arm's length emotionally, while expecting me to be available for her every whim. Real intimacy would have involved her actually talking to me before deciding to take a romantic vacation with her ex-boyfriend, instead of announcing it like a weather update. But the real masterpiece came a few days later. I hope you're happy. You've destroyed the best thing that ever happened to you. The best thing that ever happened to me. Right. Because being someone's emotional punching bag and financial safety net, while they treated me like an inconvenient roommate, was definitely the pinnacle of human experience. Each poisonous message she sent felt like another chain falling away from my ankles. For years, I'd been walking around carrying the weight of her emotional instability, her financial irresponsibility, her complete inability to consider anyone's needs but her own. I'd convinced myself that this weight was love, that caring for someone meant accepting their worst behavior and trying to fix them through patience and understanding. But watching her true colors emerge in those text messages was like having a fog lift from my brain. This wasn't love. This was emotional abuse disguised as romance. She'd spent 4 years conditioning me to believe that her happiness was my responsibility, that her problems were mine to solve, that her moods were mine to manage. And when I finally stopped playing that game, she revealed exactly what she thought of me. The freedom that came with each nasty message was intoxicating. I wasn't losing the love of my life. I was escaping someone who'd never really loved me at all. She'd loved what I could do for her, how I made her feel about herself, the stability I provided while she played out her endless dramas. But me as a person, my thoughts, my feelings, my dreams, those had never mattered to her. I started taking evening walks without needing to check in with anyone, without having to explain where I was going or when I'd be back. I went to the gym for the first time in 2 years because Clara had always complained that my workout schedule was selfish and took time away from her. I called up old friends I'd lost touch with because Clara found them boring and preferred hanging out with her crowd of fellow drama addicts. Each day that passed without her chaos felt like another small victory. I woke up when I wanted to wake up, ate what I wanted to eat, watched what I wanted to watch on TV without someone criticizing my choices or demanding we watch one of her pretentious foreign films instead. The silence in my apartment wasn't lonely. It was peaceful in a way I'd forgotten was possible. The really beautiful part was watching her lose control of the narrative. For 4 years, she'd been the director of our relationship drama, deciding when we fought, when we made up, what we fought about, how it got resolved. She'd controlled the emotional thermostat of our entire life together, turning up the heat when she needed attention and cooling things down when she wanted space to pursue other interests. But now she was just another person sending desperate messages to someone who didn't give a damn anymore. She had no power over my emotions, no ability to manipulate my responses, no way to pull me back into her web of manufactured crises. She was shouting into the void, and the void wasn't shouting back. The poison she was spitting was just showing me how lucky I was to finally be free of it. One evening, while I was enjoying a beer on my creaky balcony and actually reading a book for pleasure instead of having it interrupted every 5 minutes by manufactured drama, my phone buzzed with a text from Leo. It wasn't his usual message. This one had that urgent energy that meant someone had just stepped in a massive pile of their own bullshit, and he couldn't wait to share the spectacle. "Dude, you need to see this." The message read, followed by a screenshot that made me nearly spit out my beer laughing. Clara just posted this on Instagram. The comments are fucking brutal. There it was, in all its desperate glory. A picture of Clara and her ex, some douchebag named Derek, who looked exactly like what you'd expect from a guy who'd convinced 3 different women to take him back after cheating on them. They were at some trendy rooftop bar, probably spending money. She didn't have to create the illusion of living her best life. Clara was wearing this forced smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, the kind of expression you see on hostages in proof-of-life photos, while Derek had his arm around her with the smug look of a guy who thought he'd won some kind of prize. But the real masterpiece was the caption, "True love never dies, 2 hearts, #second chances, #soulmates, #living my truth." True love never dies. Jesus Christ, the audacity was breathtaking. This was the same woman who'd spent the last month blowing up my phone with messages ranging from desperate pleas to venomous attacks. And now she was posting inspirational quotes about eternal love with the same guy who cheated on her with her own roommate 3 years ago. The hashtags were the cherry on top of this shit Sunday. Hashtag second chances. More like hashtag third or fourth chances, considering Derek's track record. Hashtag soulmates. Sure, if your soulmate is someone who treats commitment like a suggestion and fidelity like an optional upgrade. Hashtag living my truth. The only truth she was living was that she'd rather be with someone who treated her like garbage than admit she'd fucked up the best relationship she'd ever had. But here's where it got really good. The comments section was an absolute bloodbath, and Clara had walked right into it with her eyes wide open. Leo had screenshotted the best ones, and reading them was like watching a masterclass in social media karma. "Didn't you have a boyfriend like last month?" wrote Sarah, one of Clara's college friends who'd clearly been keeping track of the timeline. "This is the same guy who cheated on you, right?" asked another mutual acquaintance, apparently not buying into Clara's revisionist history. But my personal favorite came from Marcus's cousin Jenny, who'd never particularly liked Clara but had always been polite for my sake. Some people really love being treated like shit, I guess. Different strokes for different folks. Woman shrugging. The passive-aggressive emoji was the perfect touch, just enough plausible deniability to avoid being called out directly, but savage enough to draw blood. Jenny had always been good at that kind of surgical social media strike. Even better were the reactions from people who knew both of us. Instead of the flood of hard eye emojis, and you go girl, comments Clara had probably been expecting, she was getting a masterclass in why you don't air your relationship drama on social media when everyone knows you're full of shit. "Where's Marcus in all this?" asked one of our mutual friends, apparently not buying Clara's narrative that I'd just disappeared into thin air for no reason. "Wasn't this posted from the same restaurant Marcus took you for your anniversary last year?" observed another friend with the kind of attention to detail that Clara probably wasn't counting on. That observation hit different, and I could practically see Clara's face falling as she realized people were connecting dots she'd hoped would stay disconnected. Yeah, that was the same rooftop bar where I'd spent a week's salary trying to give her a perfect anniversary dinner, only to have her spend the entire evening texting Derek about some emergency that turned out to be him being lonely after his latest girlfriend dumped him. The really beautiful part was watching Clara try to control the damage in real time. She started responding to comments with increasingly desperate attempts to maintain her narrative. Sometimes you have to follow your heart, even when others don't understand red heart, and not everyone is brave enough to fight for real love flexed biceps. But the internet is undefeated when it comes to calling out bullshit, and Clara was learning that lesson the hard way. For every inspirational platitude she posted, someone else would drop a truth bomb that exposed another layer of her self-deception. "Brave enough to fight for real love," Leo texted me. "Or stupid enough to fall for the same bullshit twice." Faced with tears of joy. The whole thing was like watching someone step on a rake in slow motion. You could see the disaster coming from a mile away, but they were too invested in their own delusion to change course. Clara had always been addicted to social media validation, constantly posting carefully curated glimpses of our relationship to make it look like we were living some kind of fairy tale. Now she was using the same playbook with Derek, except this time everyone knew the behind-the-scenes story. What really got me was the timing. A month ago, she'd been crying on my doorstep, telling me I was the love of her life and begging me to take her back. Now she was posting about true love, with the same guy who'd broken her heart so badly that she'd spent 3 months on my couch eating ice cream and making me promise I'd never treat her like he had. But here's the thing that would have shocked the old Marcus. I didn't feel angry looking at that picture. I didn't feel jealous or hurt or betrayed. I felt nothing but cold satisfaction and maybe a little pity for Derek, who clearly had no idea what he was signing up for. Because I knew something that Derek was about to learn the hard way. Clara didn't want love. She wanted chaos. She didn't want a partner. She wanted an audience. And Derek, poor bastard, had just volunteered to be the next supporting character in the ongoing drama series that was Clara's life. The comments kept coming, each one more brutal than the last, and I realized that Clara had inadvertently done me the biggest favor possible. She'd shown everyone exactly who she really was, and they weren't buying what she was selling. Sometimes the best revenge really is just letting people expose themselves. A month later, Clara returned, but this time she wasn't the smug, self-righteous woman who'd announced her romantic adventure via text message. Nope. This version of Clara looked like she'd been put through an emotional blender set on reality check. And honestly, it was both satisfying and pathetic to witness. I was coming home from the gym. Yeah, I'd actually been going to the gym regularly since escaping her emotional prison. When I spotted her sitting on the steps outside my apartment building. At first, I thought maybe I was hallucinating, because the woman hunched over on those concrete steps looked nothing like the confident, free-spirited goddess who'd been posting inspirational quotes about living her truth just weeks earlier. Her hair, usually styled to Instagram perfection, was pulled back in a greasy ponytail that screamed, "I haven't showered in 3 days." Her eyes were so swollen from crying that she looked like she'd gone 10 rounds with a heavyweight boxer. She was wearing the same ratty sweatshirt she'd had since college, the one she only broke out during her deepest depressive episodes, and her hands were shaking as she clutched a tissue that had clearly seen better days. When she looked up at me, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But then I remembered the casual cruelty of that text message, the month of venomous accusations when I wouldn't come crawling back, and the social media circus where she'd tried to parade her true love in front of everyone who knew better. "Marcus," she said, and her voice was so hoarse it sounded like she'd been crying for weeks. Which, judging by her appearance, she probably had been. I made a mistake. I made the biggest mistake of my life. No shit, Sherlock. But I didn't say that. I just stood there, gym bag in hand, looking down at the wreckage of the woman who'd thought she could trade up from someone who actually loved her to someone who'd already proven he was a piece of shit. "I thought he'd changed," she continued, the words tumbling out like she'd been rehearsing this speech for days. "I thought maybe we were both different people now, that we could make it work this time. But he hasn't changed, Marcus. He's exactly the same selfish, lying asshole he always was." The irony was so thick I could taste it. She'd spent 4 years with someone who'd treated her well, who'd been faithful, who'd bent over backwards to make her happy, and she'd thrown it all away for a guy who'd already shown her exactly who he was. But somehow, she'd convinced herself that Derek 2.0 would be different from Derek 1.0, despite all evidence to the contrary. "You were the stable one," she said, and there was something in her voice that I'd never heard before, genuine regret mixed with desperation. "You were the one who actually cared. You never lied to me, never cheated on me, never made me feel like I was worthless. And I threw it all away for a fantasy. A fantasy. Finally, a moment of actual self-awareness from someone who'd spent the better part of our relationship living in a carefully constructed delusion where she was the victim of everyone else's inability to understand her complex emotional needs. "I know I hurt you," she went on, and the tears were flowing freely now. "I know I treated you terribly, and I know I don't deserve another chance. But Marcus, you're the only good thing that ever happened to me. I was too stupid to see it when I had it, but I see it now." And there it was, the speech I'd fantasized about hearing for months when I was still invested in our toxic relationship. The acknowledgement of my worth, the admission that she'd been wrong, the recognition that she'd lost something valuable. A few months ago, these words would have been music to my ears, validation for every sleepless night I'd spent wondering if I was crazy for thinking I deserved better. But standing there looking down at her, I felt something I hadn't expected, absolutely nothing. No surge of triumph, no desire to comfort her, no inclination to say, "I told you so." Just a flat, emotionless observation of someone who'd finally run out of people to blame for her own bad decisions. "Derek started seeing someone else 2 weeks into our romantic getaway," she continued, apparently interpreting my silence as an invitation to keep talking. "Some girl he met at the hotel bar. He didn't even try to hide it from me, just told me I was too needy and that he needed variety in his life. He left me stranded in Miami with a hotel bill I couldn't pay and a plane ticket I had to beg my parents to help me change." Part of me wanted to laugh at the poetic justice of it all. She'd left a stable relationship for a fantasy, and the fantasy had turned into a nightmare so predictable that everyone except Clara had seen it coming. Derek had done exactly what Derek always did, used her for whatever he needed, and then discarded her when something shinier came along. "I called you so many times from the airport," she said, and her voice cracked completely now. "I just wanted to hear your voice, to know that maybe I hadn't destroyed everything good in my life." But you never answered. You never answered any of my calls. Of course I hadn't answered. By that point, I'd learned to recognize her number and send it straight to voicemail. I'd been too busy rebuilding my life to get sucked back into her drama, too focused on remembering what peace felt like to voluntarily return to chaos. "Please, Marcus," she said, and now she was looking up at me with those red-rimmed eyes that used to be my weakness. "I know I don't deserve it, but please give me another chance. I'll do anything. I'll change. I'll go to therapy. I'll never talk to Derek again. I'll be the woman you deserve. The woman I deserve." As if she could just flip a switch and become someone different, someone capable of basic respect and consideration. As if 4 years of emotional manipulation could be erased by a few weeks of consequences catching up with her. I looked at her for a long time, this broken woman who'd once held so much power over my happiness, and realized that the spell was completely broken. She wasn't the love of my life. She was just another person who'd learned too late that actions have consequences. I looked at her for a long time, calm as the night air around us, watching this broken woman who'd once controlled every aspect of my emotional life, like she was conducting some twisted orchestra where I was always playing second fiddle to her drama. The silence stretched between us, heavy with 4 years of history and 1 month of absolute clarity that had changed everything. Clara sat there on those concrete steps, clutching that soggy tissue like a lifeline, waiting for me to say something that would give her hope. Her eyes were searching my face for any sign of the old Marcus. The one who would have immediately dropped to his knees to comfort her, who would have started apologizing for her pain even though I hadn't caused it, who would have convinced himself that her suffering somehow erased all the bullshit she'd put me through. But that Marcus was gone, killed off by a text message and buried under a month of the most peaceful solitude I'd experienced in years. The man standing here now was someone who'd remembered what self-respect felt like, what it was like to sleep through the night without wondering what crisis would greet me in the morning, what it meant to make decisions based on my own needs instead of constantly managing someone else's emotional temperature. "You want to know something, Clara?" I finally said, my voice steady and calm in a way that seemed to surprise her. "A month ago, these words from you would have meant everything to me. I would have seen your tears and thought they were proof that you finally understood what you'd lost. I would have heard your apologies and convinced myself that they meant you'd actually changed." She looked up at me with something like hope flickering in those red-rimmed eyes, probably thinking this was the beginning of my forgiveness speech, the part where I'd tell her that love conquers all and we could work through anything together. "But here's the thing," I continued, and I could see that hope starting to dim as she realized where this was heading. "I don't want your apologies anymore. I don't want your promises to change or your desperate attempts to convince me that you've finally figured out my worth. Because you know what, Clara? You knew my worth all along. You just didn't give a damn about it." The words came out measured and deliberate, each one carefully chosen and delivered without a trace of the anger or bitterness she was probably expecting. This wasn't a furious rant from a wounded ex-boyfriend. This was a calm statement of facts from someone who'd finally seen the situation clearly. "You didn't leave me for Derek because you thought he'd treat you better," I said, watching her face crumble as I spoke. "You left me for Derek because you thought I'd always be here waiting when he inevitably let you down. You gambled our entire relationship on the assumption that I was too weak, too desperate, too pathetic to walk away from you." She opened her mouth to protest, but I held up a hand to stop her. I wasn't done yet, and after 4 years of being interrupted every time I tried to express a thought or feeling, I was damn well going to finish this conversation on my terms. "The saddest part is that you were almost right," I continued. "For 4 years, I did exactly what you expected me to do. I absorbed your moods. I made excuses for your behavior. I convinced myself that love meant accepting whatever scraps of affection you felt like throwing my way. I was so afraid of losing you that I lost myself instead." The tears were flowing freely down her face now, but they didn't move me the way they used to. I'd seen this performance too many times, had fallen for it too often, had allowed myself to be manipulated by the sight of her pain into forgetting about my own. "But you made one crucial miscalculation," I said, and now there was something in my voice that made her look up sharply. "You assumed that because I'd put up with your bullshit for 4 years, I'd put up with it forever. You thought you could push me as far as you wanted, and I'd always come crawling back, grateful for whatever crumbs of attention you decided to give me. Clara was sobbing openly now, making those ugly crying sounds that she'd always hated anyone to witness. The woman who'd spent 4 years carefully controlling her image, who'd never let me see her at anything less than her best, was completely falling apart on my doorstep. "I did love you, Clara," I said, and these were the hardest words to say because they were still true, even after everything. "I loved you enough to work double shifts to pay for your dreams. I loved you enough to pretend I didn't notice when you came home smelling like someone else's cologne. I loved you enough to convince myself that your problems were mine to solve." She looked up at me then with something like desperation, probably hearing the past tense, but still hoping that love could be resurrected, that feelings that strong didn't just die because of one mistake. "But love isn't enough without respect," I continued, and this was the truth I'd learned during my month of freedom. "And you never respected me, Clara. Not once in 4 years. You saw me as a safety net, a backup plan, a convenient solution to your problems. But you never saw me as an equal partner whose feelings mattered as much as yours." The silence that followed was deafening. She sat there on those steps, processing the reality that this wasn't a negotiation or a discussion. This was a closing statement. The trial was over, the verdict was in, and there would be no appeals. "You made your choice when you sent that text message," I said quietly. "You chose Derek over me, chaos over stability, drama over love. I made my choice when I walked away. I chose myself for the first time in 4 years, and it's the best decision I've ever made." Her tears fell faster now, but my resolve didn't shake. I'd spent too many nights watching her cry to be moved by it anymore. I'd learned the hard way that her tears weren't always genuine remorse. Sometimes they were just another manipulation tactic, another way to make her pain more important than anyone else's. "This is goodbye, Clara," I said with a finality that seemed to hit her like a physical blow. "Not see you later, or maybe someday. This is goodbye forever. You wanted to know what life was like without me. Now you get to find out." She left in silence, finally understanding that some bridges, once burned, can never be rebuilt. Life didn't magically fix itself after Clara walked away from my doorstep that final time. And anyone who tells you that dumping toxic people instantly transforms your existence into some kind of Instagram-worthy paradise is selling you bullshit. But here's what did happen. For the first time in 4 years, I wasn't constantly bracing for impact, waiting for the next emotional bomb to explode in my face, or walking on eggshells around someone whose mood could shift faster than a politician's promises during election season. The silence in my apartment wasn't the oppressive kind that makes you want to fill it with noise just to prove you're still alive. It was the good kind of quiet, the kind where you can actually hear yourself think instead of constantly monitoring someone else's emotional weather patterns. I could eat cereal for dinner without someone lecturing me about nutrition. I could watch whatever I wanted on Netflix without having to endure another 3-hour foreign film about the profound existential crisis of modern womanhood. I could go to bed when I was tired instead of staying up until 2 a.m. providing free therapy for someone who never bothered to ask how my day went. The gym became my new church, and let me tell you, there's something almost spiritual about deadlifting twice your body weight when you're no longer carrying the emotional baggage of someone who treated commitment like a hobby they could pick up and put down whenever something more interesting came along. I wasn't trying to get revenge body ripped or anything that dramatic. I was just rediscovering what it felt like to do something purely for myself, without having to justify it to someone who saw my personal time as time stolen from her. Work became tolerable again, too. Turns out it's a lot easier to focus on quarterly reports and client presentations when you're not getting passive-aggressive texts every hour about how you never prioritize the relationship or how you're emotionally unavailable because you can't drop everything to discuss her latest friend drama. My boss even commented on my improved attitude, which was hilarious because I hadn't realized how much Clara's constant chaos had been bleeding into every aspect of my life. But the real transformation was in my social life. Leo and I started hanging out regularly again, something that had been nearly impossible during the Clara years because she'd always found reasons why she needed me more than my friends did. We'd grab beers after work, shoot pool on weekends, have actual conversations about sports and work and life without me having to cut everything short because someone was having a crisis that required my immediate attention. You know what's crazy? Leo said one evening as we were watching the game at our favorite dive bar. You're actually fun to be around again. For the last couple years, it was like hanging out with someone who was constantly waiting for bad news. He wasn't wrong. I'd spent so much time in survival mode, managing Clara's emotions and anticipating her next dramatic revelation, that I'd forgotten how to just exist in the moment. Every conversation, every plan, every simple pleasure had been filtered through the lens of how will Clara react to this, and what will this cost me in terms of relationship drama later. The dating apps stayed deleted though, not because I was pining for Clara or harboring some secret hope that she'd come crawling back with a better apology, but because I was genuinely enjoying my own company for the first time in years. I was rediscovering who Marcus was when he wasn't constantly adapting himself to fit someone else's ever-changing definition of the perfect boyfriend. I took up cooking, something Clara had always mocked as too domestic, while simultaneously expecting me to handle all the grocery shopping and meal planning. Turns out I'm actually pretty decent at it when I'm not trying to accommodate someone who changes her dietary restrictions every other week based on whatever wellness influencer she's currently following. I started reading again. Really reading, not just skimming articles between crisis management sessions. Science fiction, history, biographies of people who'd actually accomplished something meaningful with their lives instead of just posting inspirational quotes about living authentically while treating everyone around them like supporting characters in their personal drama. The occasional updates about Clara came through the social media grapevine, and they painted exactly the picture you'd expect. She'd bounced back to Derek twice more after our final conversation, each reconciliation lasting about as long as a Hollywood marriage before imploding in spectacular fashion. Her Instagram became a masterclass in performative healing, filled with quotes about learning to love yourself and releasing toxic people from your life, apparently without a trace of irony about who the toxic person actually was in most of her relationships. But here's the beautiful thing. I didn't feel vindicated by her continued disasters. I didn't feel superior or satisfied or even particularly interested. She'd become irrelevant to my life in the most complete way possible, not through anger or bitterness, but through simple indifference. She was just another person making bad decisions somewhere else, no longer my problem to solve or my chaos to manage. 6 months after that final conversation on my doorstep, I ran into her at the grocery store. She looked exactly like you'd expect someone to look who'd spent half a year ping-ponging between toxic relationships and posting cryptic Facebook statuses about finding her truth. Tired, a little desperate around the edges, trying too hard to project confidence while clearly falling apart underneath. She saw me first, and I watched her face cycle through about 6 different emotions in 3 seconds. Surprise, hope, calculation, disappointment, and finally resignation. For a moment, I thought she might try to approach me, maybe attempt one more pitch for why we should give it another shot. But something in my expression must have communicated what words couldn't. That ship hadn't just sailed. It had sunk to the bottom of the ocean and been claimed by the fish. I nodded politely, the way you'd acknowledge any casual acquaintance, and kept walking. The sweetest revenge wasn't proving her wrong with words or gestures or dramatic confrontations. It wasn't showing up to places where I knew she'd be with someone new, or posting carefully curated social media content designed to make her jealous. The sweetest revenge was simply living better without her, and meaning it.